Good afternoon and welcome to our webinar today on tools for optimising prescribed burn programs. For those that don't know me, I'm Deb Sparks from the Centre of Excellence for Prescribed Burning, and I'd like to begin today by acknowledging the traditional owners of the country that we're meeting on today and acknowledging their elders past, present and emerging. Today we've got two very experienced practitioners talking to you. Our first presenter today is Jill Reid, who is the Manager for Planned Burning with Parks Victoria, based in the Grampians in Victoria. She will be presenting on the tool developed with her team at Forest Fire Management that they used to choose to do the right burns at the right time. Just hand over to you now, Jill.
Thank you, Deb. I'll just start sharing my screen. That should be starting to share right now. Thank you, Deb. It's a pleasure to be here today. As Deb said, my name's Jill Reid. I'm Manager Planned Burning for Parks Victoria. And I'd like to start with acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we are meeting right across Australia today, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and also pay my respects to any elders who may be here with us today. It gives me a great pleasure to present to you on behalf of my Forest Fire Management Victoria colleagues, Andrew Blackett, Steve DeVogue and Phil Timpano, on some work that we've been doing in Victoria. And it's to help us develop a methodology to consider a range of information on planned burns across the state and provide us with decision support when we are scheduling and delivering burns to help us to choose the right burns at the right time. And this work has been a collaboration across agencies, and I would like to acknowledge all contributors, in particular regional fuel management coordinators, the members of the Forest and Fire Risk Assessment Unit and the Fuel Management System team. To start with, it's a given in Victoria that we use planned burning to modify fuels and bushfire hazard. And this is described for us in the Code of Practice for Bushfire Management on Public Land. And I'll refer to this document as the code as I go through this presentation. The code also outlines the use of planned burning to contribute to ecological objectives and to assist with bushfire suppression activities. The code has two primary objectives. The first one is to minimise the impacts of major bushfires on human life, property and infrastructure, with human life taking primacy above all other objectives. And the second primary objective is to maintain or improve ecological resilience. The code also requires us to have a risk-based approach to bushfire planning, and that this planning be done at the local or regional scale. So fuel management, including planned burning, is one strategy and a multifaceted approach that we use to manage bushfire risk in Victoria. So today I'm going to give you a brief introduction to the planned burn optimisation methodology, why we've gone down this path. Also an understanding of where this methodology sits in the planning framework for planned burning in Victoria. And then I'm going to dive into some details so you can have an understanding of the inputs and how it all comes together before finishing up with a couple of discussion slides. So firstly, who is Forest Fire Management Victoria? Well, the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning, or DELP, is a control agency for managing bushfire risk on public land in Victoria. DELP delivers the bushfire management, including fuel management activities, in partnership with Parks Victoria, Vic Forests and Melbourne Water, under the banner of Forest Fire Management Victoria. We deliver a large burn program across the state each year, a long-term average of close to 500 burns a year, with the majority of the program delivered in autumn. And the entire annual burn program is important for us to deliver to provide benefits to the community and environment. However, constraints on our program that most likely occur right across the country, including weather and prolonged bushfire seasons, can see the autumn burn season contracted, burn windows become narrow, and resources stretched when peak burn windows arrive. The plan burn optimisation method that we are implementing to help make decisions brings together once dispersed information into a single transparent decision support tool that enables consideration of a range of factors at the same time. This type of work, so understanding burn priorities, has been always undertaken at the district level, but what we haven't had in the past is the ability to share this information in a consistent manner. So the method provides a strategic approach to maximising the effect of our effort by making the best use of each available window, especially when seasonal conditions constrain opportunities to deliver the burn program. The objective is to help deliver the most important burns and achieve the best outcomes for communities and the environment. So this is a bit of a planning overview, and this slide shows a simplified overview of Victoria's framework for planning and delivering the Plan Burn program. And my presentation today will focus on this dark blue box here. And what this slide demonstrates is that the methodology is delivered in line with and informed by the overarching planning documents and the Victorian Government's Safer Together policy, which states that the government will use a risk reduction target to guide fuel management on public land, maintaining bushfire risk at or below 70%. The plan burn optimisation method in that dark blue box uses the annual burn program from the Joint Fuel Management Program. Each burn in the program is given firstly a state ranking, secondly a regional ranking, and thirdly an estimated burn window. And matrices bring all this information together to form a picture of burn importance and priorities for resourcing. This information is carried through to scheduling and delivery of the burn and informs the monitoring, evaluation and reporting of the program. I'm just going to go into a bit of detail with this slide about the state burn ranking. And I think Andrew Blackett has joined us today. And if there are any questions specifically to this later, Deb, I will have Andrew there to be able to support any questions. So this is an overview of how the state burn ranking is established. So it's achieved through computer modelling with Phoenix Fire Simulator. It considers the contribution that each burn makes to reducing potential impacts of future bushfires on life and property. The burn ranking method, apologies, I've got a dog here that's in the background that's barking. Sorry, the burn ranking method is based on the difference between potential bushfire impacts if the burn program is implemented in full and the potential impacts if it's not implemented at all. And this involves simulating thousands of potential bushfires across the landscape using Phoenix. In the two cases that fuel loads are as they would be 3 years into the future if all burns on the program are implemented, or 3 years into the future if no burns on the program are implemented. In this hypothetical example on the slide, JFMP burns reduce the estimated impact of the bushfire by 1,000 properties. The burns responsible for this reduction are those that interact with the unmitigated bushfire, so that's the blue ones in the middle figure. Scores for each burn are summed across approximately 11,000 simulated bushfires across the state, leading to an overall risk reduction for each score for each burn. From the model scores, the burns are ranked by clusters from S1, so they're the burns with the greatest potential influence on reducing statewide residual risk, to S4 burns with the least potential influence on reducing statewide residual risk. So what I'd like to do now is show you how some of the rankings come together and also the burn windows to help us with optimising the program. So this diagram shows the state ranking of burns in the first box there, as mentioned, and also the regional ranking of burns, and that's in the second box there. So to assign these regional rankings, district staff use local knowledge and understanding of the landscape, community and desired outcomes together with landscape scale risk modelling. This approach provides input of local and regional priorities that would be hard to detect using statewide computer modelling alone to optimise the planned burn program. So these regional rankings are R1 is high, R2 moderate, and R3 normal importance, and they're allocated to each burn. And this ranking considers how important burns are for high risk reduction value, high local risk reduction, or could be a cultural priority, an ecological priority, a community priority. It could be an enabling burn that's really important for other burns in the future, or it could be aligned to the strategic bushfire management plan in some other way. So this information is manually entered into the centralised planning system and is available for all staff to view. We then combine these rankings in a matrix. So the state and regional rankings are combined to provide an overall burn, what we call an overall burn importance ranking. And you'll see that in box 3 there on this slide. From this combined ranking, each burn is labelled a program priority ranking of either red, amber or green. And there's a description down the bottom here for each of the priority rankings. So it's either very high importance for program effectiveness, high importance or normal delivery importance for program effectiveness. The next step is to understand timing critical burns. To do this, the burn window is estimated. So we use one of 3 categories and they're allocated to each burn by district teams. So the categories are very narrow, so that's around about 1 or 2 days a season that we might have to deliver that burn. Narrow is approximately 7 days a season that we might have to deliver the burn, and broad is any time after the autumn break with no major timing constraints, and you'll see those down the bottom of this slide. These burn windows are informed by vegetation type, weather, specific conditions including wind direction or a very constrained position in the landscape, high elevation or other physical constraints that influence the burn window. To help us understand those burns that are highly important for program effectiveness but only usually have a narrow opportunity to deliver and are therefore an important consideration for resourcing at the right time, we use another matrix and combine program priority ranking of red, amber or green from the top box with the estimated burn window of very narrow, narrow or broad. And this gives each burn a resourcing priority of either very high, high or normal priority. When we get into burn delivery, the information from the optimisation process in the box at the top of this slide is presented against each burn in our burn scheduling information. The 9-day burn schedule is a system-produced live list of burns in Victoria. It displays a range of information for each burn, including the burn ranking data. This is a critical list for burn program delivery that allows for understanding the relative priority of burns and the timing critical burns that are scheduled. The data is also represented in a dashboard map. This schedule list and the map helps us with conversations across the state about resourcing and also within regions and districts about resourcing. And importantly, this method is supported by documented resource sharing principles. And online statewide meetings are held during peak times. It can be up to 3 times a week. And which support discussions around program delivery and optimisation. This part of the process allows for good transparency of the program across regions in the state. At times, regions have offered up resources to support other regions given the information that we talk about and we present during these discussions. Also, the state agency commander is provided with a good picture of the program, scheduling confidence and competing needs, and can use this information and the principles to inform priority resource decisions if they're needed at that level. So what I'll do now is talk a little bit about the reporting. So the two items on this slide, the green one is a Forest Fire Management Victoria's Fuel Management Report Card from 2018-19, and the graph tells the story of how bushfire risk changes over time in Victoria. Both of these are available on the Forest Fire Management Victoria webpage. So the red dotted line you see there is a percentage of bushfire risk over time. The grey dotted line is the projected bushfire risk without fuel reduction, and the green dotted line is the projected bushfire risk with maximum planned fuel reduction. So just a little bit about autumn 2019. So not this past autumn, but the autumn before that this report card relates to. It was quite a challenging season for planned burning. There were very dry conditions in Victoria and periods of high fire danger through March and most of April. Planned burning started later than normal due to the unfavourable weather and fuel conditions, which restricted the available burn windows during March and April. It was good that the planned burning season did extend later than usual in some areas, with burns being undertaken through May and June thanks to that unseasonably warm, dry conditions. Our optimisation work supported us to be targeted when the opportunities did arise for burning during the season. And we had some, so in essence, we had some seasonal limitations that were affected by our ability to deliver the entire program. But what we did get done, though, we think gave us better outcome because we could be more targeted using the optimisation tool. If you look at the graph there, it does show that the residual risk increased from 68 to 69 in 2018-19, and without the delivery of fuel reduction program, it's estimated that the bushfire risk would have increased to 72. It must be highlighted, though, that strategic risk reduction is achieved by delivery of the entire burn program over a number of years, not a single burn nor during a single year. Results from the delivery of the 2019-20 program that we're going through now will be analysed and are expected to be published in the Forest Fire Management Victoria's 2020 Fuel Management Report when it's available. So just a couple of slides on discussion before I finish up. The objective of this work is to have a method that assists with the decision making for optimising the delivery of the planned burn program. The work we've done has identified that a mixture of statewide modelled and local information, along with understanding the timing critical burns, can help us achieve this. But this work has limitations and it needs to be interpreted and messaged appropriately for its intended use. And it's still evolving, it's a work in progress. And it does have the potential to support a range of decisions for delivery of the program. As an example, the ranking data can be presented in and used in a number of ways, including to help understand within regions what are the important burns to deliver over 1 year or over 3 years. These different ways to use and view the data can be a way of informing regional operations. But we need to maintain as well an understanding of the state picture and the strategic overview of risk reduction. Statewide risk ranking, that S1 discussion that we had at the start, is a useful starting point for the optimisation process, and it is necessary consideration in guiding Forest Fire Management Victoria to achieve the statewide risk reduction target. Burns from all 3 years of the Joint Fuel Management Program are ranked together as a group, assuming that all of the burns on the program will be delivered. And because of this, burns which work together to reduce bushfire impacts will tend to score highly together. So we need to make sure that we interpret that and consider highly ranked burns in the context of the highly ranked burns, supporting them and being delivered as a package. It must also be remembered that the statewide ranking reflects the relative effectiveness of planned burns on reducing the impacts of the types of major bushfires that are simulated with Phoenix using weather that represents a catastrophic forest fire danger index of 130. So a similar day to Black Saturday. The effectiveness under other weather conditions are not currently considered in the state ranking. However, work underway in a project called Risk 2.0 will incorporate other weather streams into the analysis, and this work will be completed by mid-2021. Critically, state ranking results should not be interpreted to mean that S3 and S4 burns are unimportant to deliver. For example, many S4 burns are important for reducing severity of large campaign bushfires that may occur under less extreme weather condition than those simulated. All ranked burns already exist on the JFMP and have been through a extensive planning and approval process and are expected to be delivered. A significant gap or limitation that we currently have is for the ability for us to better model and understand the importance of burns to help reduce the impacts of large severe bushfires to support biodiversity conservation and burns to meet conservation objectives. Currently also there is limited guidance for regional ranking, which allows for a learning by doing approach. However, this can create inconsistency and undermine the transparency of information. Improved guidance for this step will help improve program effectiveness. However, by the same token, this also allows for human input, discussion and negotiation rather than a modelled output. The optimisation methodology can provide transparent priorities and timing constraints for engagement with communities in interest. So we can share with others those burns that are very important for program effectiveness of reducing risk to life and property, but only have a limited window of opportunity to deliver. So therefore we might have reduced flexibility when the conditions are right for those burns to be delivered. The future use of this method could also include supporting decision making around managing our contribution to smoke load, also with consideration of the relative importance and estimated delivery of burns that are scheduled. Delivery of all burns on the JFMP, so just in conclusion, delivering all of our burns is the best outcome. Delivering only a subset of the burns will not meet the overall outcomes that are being sought for communities and environment. However, with constrained conditions, as we've discussed, the seasonal conditions, this optimisation method can help us to focus on the most important burns that deliver the most effective part of the program. This method brings together information for decision making into one place. However, it doesn't make the decision. The burn optimisation method supports people to consider priorities and the opportunities when decisions need to be made. Collaboration is the key to ensuring that this work can support decision makers at all scales of delivery, helping us to choose to do the right burns at the right time. So thank you, Deb. I'll leave it there and hand back to you.
Thanks, Jill. Just a reminder that we'll be doing questions at the end of both presentations. You can put them in the chat box or we'll give you the opportunity to ask in person if you raise your hand. Our next presenter today is Brian Levine, who is the Prescribed Fire and Predictive Services Coordinator for ACT Parks and Conservation Services. Brian is going to present on a suite of tools and data systems that his team have developed for optimising their prescribed burn programs. I'd also like to note that Brian was the inaugural winner of the FTS Excellence in Prescribed Burning Award last year for his services to Australia's prescribed burning practices. Thank you, Brian, over to you.
Thank you very much, Deb, and thanks for having me. All right, hopefully everybody can see my screen now. Before I get started, I'd like to acknowledge also the local custodians, past, present, and future, for which this work has been done on. That's done on a wall, people. I also like to acknowledge the co-authors, the various co-authors who have assisted on multiple papers in this project. And additionally, I'd like to acknowledge the Fire Management Unit of the Parks and Conservation Service in particular, and also the bushfire crew for their effort in the collection of fuel information. So on my talk today, as Deb mentioned, going to be talking about our use of data systems and tools. I'm sort of going to break it down into three different components: a discussion on a portion of our intelligence unit or gathering system. The second part will be on the prescribed burn decision support tool, and the third will be is how we've addressed issues with resourcing for prescribed burns. The first two sections, fuel moisture and the prescribed burn decision support tool, I've previously presented on, so I'm not going to go into great detail on those. Those webinars are available, I believe, on the Center of Excellence website, so you can see that information in detail there. So we'll just get started, thanks. So the first portion of the talk is going to be the use of data information. I'm just going to focus on weather stations, fuel moisture, and the use of the SODAR equipment. So as you can see is a map of the ACT, and the three red circles there represent the Bureau's automatic weather stations. And historically, that's what we had. Two of them were in the urban area, and the third one is at high elevation, Mount Giannini. So we did have a little bit of a gap there. What you now see is the investment that Parks and Conservation Service has made for automatic weather stations. The ones with the green rectangles, squares, sorry, represent ones that are high level weather stations from FTS that the BOM now accepts their data. And we've partnered with the Tasmanian Fire Service to have this dashboard where we can view those stations, as you can see, and also create a dashboard where we can look at some specific sensors that are useful to prescribe burning, like soil moisture and fuel moisture. And then again, if we want more detail, we can pull mediagrams for each of those sites. In terms of fuel moisture, as we were working through our 10-year regional plan, we did start getting to some more difficult burns that required moisture differentials, ridgetop burns that had soft edges, and we were lacking information to make informed decisions. And through there, we established the fuel moisture program in 2015. And what you see on the screen now is a map of 1 year's burn program and the various weather stations and fuel moisture plots. So we're looking to get good representation across the ACT, different elevation profiles, forest types, and locations. But more importantly, as we created this program, we needed to make sure that we could achieve this program by being able to sample it. We have now set up permanent plots across the ACT. In addition, we supplement around each of the burn areas. The main difference between the permanent plots and the burn areas is we collect live fuels at each of the permanent sites. And this is a map of a previous burn and just gives you an idea of how we sample on multiple aspects to try to get that information. In terms of actual live fuel moisture, what we're looking to do is sample the flammability of the elevated fuel, and we do look at 3 different types of fuel types. So we sample the most dominant eucalypt in the area, Divisia, and Acacia. We're basically looking at only living leaves and twigs, material less than 6 mils, and we found that this information can also be very useful during the bushfire season. In terms of the dead fuel collection, we look at 3 different fuel sizes. The 1 hour fuel, which is less than 6 mils, is their first one. We also do the 10-hour fuel sticks, 6 to 25 mils, and you can see a picture of that equipment there. And lastly, and I believe the game changer, is the larger fuels, 100-hour fuels, 26 to 75 mils. The crews will go out there, take a sample, we put it in the oven and weigh the difference there. Looking at a prescribed burn in 2019, the smokers burn. This is a burn that we were looking to implement the green portions of the map that you can see. And what we found over a couple of years is very few opportunities where we are within the acceptable range. So if you look at some of our data collection, this is one of our permanent sites. The orange is the 100-hour fuels, and the 10-hour is in green. And then you've got the horizontal bars going across. Essentially, you're trying to get the orange in the orange and the green for what we determined as the acceptable range. And as you can see, as we pull up the ellipticals here, over a course of a couple of years, we really only established 3 times where we were within acceptable range for both fuel classes. When we looked specifically at just the 10-hour sticks that we put across the burn, again, over a course of a year, one window we identified as suitable. Another one of the permanent plots, again, we've highlighted one area at the beginning of April there in 2019, and looking specifically at the burn site, there's that window again where we've got consensus across the burn area. Moving on to the last component of the intelligence that's worth mentioning is the use of SODAR equipment, acoustic wind profiler. This is a program that we established at the University of New South Wales, Canberra, after a prescribed burn that jumped the line a bit in 2014. And what this looks to do is SODAR is like a radar, but it uses sound and it sends an audible tone every 10 seconds and measures wind speed and wind direction at 30 meter intervals up to a height of almost 900 meters above the ground. This has been really useful for us in terms of identifying winds at different elevations, obviously, but also we can determine strong north winds that are mixing down, helps us with boundary layer inversions and identifying different wind shifts. So the colorful graph that you see here is showing your wind at the different height, and it's classified by color and wind bars as well. And this reports on a 24-hour timestamp. I'm now going to shift to the middle component, which is the prescribed burn decision support tool. So once we gather all this information, we then use this tool to determine whether it's suitable to implement the burn on a given window. And so the prescribed burn decision support tool, or the DST as we refer to it, it basically is a decision support tool. It looks to quantify risk assessment that helps us with decision making. I think what's been most important is it allows us to look at each burn in a consistent and systematic manner. And this tool in particular focuses on the risk of escape and smoke. But essentially what it does, it just formalizes everything that we've always done in the past, sitting around the table. So how does the DST work? Well, it's a 6-step process. And the first step essentially is identifying the burn context. So again, looking at the smokers burn in 2019, we go through a series of prompts, which we then can put some brief comments in and rate the significance. And then most importantly, at the bottom, you have the ability to summarize the context and write some additional notes. And this is one of the opportunities in the tool where you actually can document your decision to go forward. Steps 2 through 4 are essentially the core of the tool. It's a series of matrices for a likelihood and consequence for both risk of escape and smoke. We've identified key factors. It's configurable for different regions across the ACT, and it's repeatable. So for each burn, again, as I mentioned before, you're going to measure it on the merit of the burn itself based on these parameters that have already been decided. Step 5 is where it takes that information from the previous steps and comes out with the risk matrix and a score. And then step 6 is simply the assessment outcome. And this is the other area where the assessor has the ability to document their decision making, which is very important. The tool also provides some supporting documentation like expected fire behavior. that you might see on your burn and helps you identify those burn windows. The last component that I wanted to talk about was the PCS resource allocation system, which is now referred to as Samara. So this project was identified basically from the problem of how we resource burns. We had a lack of a common operating picture. So through the agency, we had a number of Excel spreadsheets, which were located in different locations, not always known. And the rosters that we had for the agency, had roles or tasking for district personnel and fire personnel, but was mainly set up for bushfire. So when we went ahead and tried to then take that information and put it into prescribed burn planning, we found that it was either outdated or not applicable because those people made themselves available for just the bushfire season. We also had a problem with tracking fatigue and just general awareness, as I mentioned, of our staff's availability. So this led to inefficiencies in planning our prescribed burns, deployments, and responding to different issues. Long story short, anyone who's done resourcing for a burn, it was very time consuming and problematic, and why I have gray hair now. So the system flow that we've sort of incorporated is 3 components, which I'm going to discuss today. One was creating a roster for the whole agency, a common operating picture. That roster can be broken down by work pattern, by depots. You can roster units or different roles or tasks. It also incorporates fatigue and personnel's availability. Most importantly, though, it incorporates their skills and qualifications in the system. We then can take that information and do some forward planning, whether that be a prescribed burn, a deployment, or any sort of event that parks might use. And lastly, once you build that incident, you can then communicate that to your staff by automated messages to either the mobile app or the email. So I'll just take you through this. So what you can see here, I believe, would be just one of our depot rosters. And while that looks like a lot of information, once you're familiar with it, it becomes second nature. So each of these boxes contains information for individuals. So you can see people's work patterns, whether they've been assigned a role or not, and their availability. And what you have the ability to do then is assign people different roles if you choose to. So for example, this person is assigned to be a tanker driver, but you could then switch their availability. And as you can see here, the individual is not qualified to do wildlife for our agency. So therefore, it came up with a pop-up of not qualified. So within each of these, again, you see a dot with the availability. You've got your different work patterns associated with this, and you can tell that they've been assigned to different roles. Then what's very important for our prescribed burn program is having the staff be able to set their availability. And so we've got a mobile app that we've created where, again, they can grab their phone and assign their availability, whether they're on leave or not. And most importantly, they can add a comment. So sometimes people might be on leave, but if we had a big bushfire, if they wanted to be involved in a prescribed burn, they could then make themselves available under those circumstances. And that then reports back to the system. Once we have this information, we then go to our incident planning. And for our system, we originally started an Access database after we moved from Excel spreadsheets. And as we started to create this system, the incident module that we created was one thing that became sort of something that we were aware of once we started building the Access database. All these different doors and avenues did, and this was one of the components that came from the add-on of a roster. And so just having a look at this module, this helps us, again, with any sort of type of incident, whether it's a prescribed burn or a biosecurity event for our agency. And we designed this based on the use of aims. And so for our prescribed burn program, we sometimes will run one burn with no incident management team, or we might run multiple burns at the same time using an incident management team. So because the system was based on the AIM structure, we have the ability to add different divisions and then sectors within the division. So it's really up to us on how we choose to run that incident on the given time. When we go to actually assign those, unlike the past, we're able to then pull from that roster that we already have. And as you can see, when you add, when you're adding individuals, it will pull up their qualifications. If we've already rostered different trucks, then that information comes up. But if you haven't, we can then add staff to the different individuals, and you can see their different qualifications, so you can choose people at the time. Additionally, with this system, it's given us the availability, it's given us the ability, oh, excuse me here, we'll just go back here. It's given us the ability to sort of streamline our other practices. So because each person has what we call a user card here, they have the ability to put in different things like meal requirements, because we do. As you can see, one person, no name mentioned, is a flexitarian. So that way we can cater for them as we go ahead and do the burn. It helps us with our logistics. We can then print that information. So what this program has essentially done for us is streamline our efficiencies. We can also then print the plan. And one of the features that I was really keen on was creating exports. We can put them directly into our incident action plans, which I'll show you momentarily. So the last time saver that we have is we take that information from the incident and it pulls the most recent incident there. We could then choose to email it to our staff, and it automatically will pre-populate the incident there. And we then push create, and we can then push that out to our staff in both an email if we so desire, and also the mobile app once it's distributed. We can then see who's actually seen the event. So sometimes obviously people can, their availability could change after the fact. So it allows us to then see who's actually seen the incident assignment and then get back to us. And the individual will then get a text message, and this is what it looks like on their phone with some names blacked out, of course. So in terms of the incident action plan, these were the exported tables that come from that system, and they get dropped directly into our incident action plans. So that's a time saver as well. So overall, the outcomes of what I've discussed today, this information helps us make more informed decision making, and I sort of like to say trust the data, as it's been quite useful for us. There's been a lot of talk about shrinking burn windows with climate change, but with the fuel moisture information we have, it's almost became a little bit that maybe the windows are not so much shrinking, but they're actually shifting through the year. So that's been quite useful to be able to find different opportunities later in autumn that we previously thought were not within the acceptable parameters. In terms of the decision-making tool, it's really helped us document the decisions based on the available information at that time, and we've been able to prove that. Being able to systematically go through burn has been quite useful as well. In terms of the last component, having one roster, a common operating picture, has been a game changer for us. Then taking that information and being able to forward plan has been a game changer as well. And overall, we've just improved our efficiency by having automated processes and not having to double handle data anymore. And lastly, we can then report and all that, how many people we had on the burns and so forth. I also just wanted to touch base a little bit on some visuals of the burn. So the smokers burn that I talked about previously, we did in April of 2019. You can, on the screen here, you'll see 3 different timestamps of the burn severity that Dr. Leavesley produced for us. And you can see the fire sort of flanked the burn at a couple different times. This was a visual of the burn, and so I put a red dashed line along where our burn sort of ended, and you can see the bushfire that came through. While it did burn through there, we still have green canopy across the area that we burnt this past year, where we have pretty much high severity and moonscape throughout the adjacent areas of the burn. This is just another view looking from the other angle, where you can see the area that we backed down the hill has largely canopy intact. And this is, again, that same area from a landscape view. Maybe the color is not as good, but I think you can get the impact of the burn there. And with that, I would thank you for your time and open it up to any questions to myself or Jill. Thanks.
Thanks, Brian. Really great systems that both you and Jill have got going there. So I'll just throw some questions at you now. Jill, if you'd like to unmute yourself, the first question is for you, and that is, how efficient is the approval process for your joint fire management plan?
I did see that question. Thank you for the person who put that there. It's a good question about the joint fuel management plan and what is it. So the joint fuel management, it's actually not a joint fuel management plan, it's a joint fuel management program. And that program is joint between Forest Fire Management Victoria agencies, led by DELP as a control agency for bushfire management on public land, and the Country Fire Authority, which is a CFA. So the approvals for that plan are by the two control agencies, so with the CFA being the control agency for fire on private land in Victoria. So the approval is between the DELP Chief Fire Officer and the CFA's Chief Fire Officer. So Parks Victoria is involved in the development of the joint fuel management program throughout Victoria in the districts and regions, and also at the appropriate level we note the works that are being undertaken on Parks Victoria land. We also participate in briefings for approvals, so it's quite a well planned approvals process. And it happens in the latter part of the year. So towards, I think it's around about September, October, that approval usually happens. Thanks, Deb.
Thanks, Jill. And just following on from that, there was a couple of questions about how you incorporate community consultation and views into your consideration, how you might consider those during your prioritisation process.
I did see those questions, and they're really good ones too. So what I just want to mention is that community views are incorporated and well into our planning at the strategic level, as well as the operational planning level, and can also be brought in at that scheduling level too. So when we're developing up our strategic bushfire management plans, we do have a good engagement process for a lot of people to generally be involved in that, and that's open, and that was on Engage Victoria for people to be involved. And when it gets to the joint fuel management program, people can have input at that level too. And when it comes to actually scheduling the burns, we may have some considerations around community events or important aspects of a town's life. Like I'll use an example, you might have a food and wine festival or something that you'll have feedback around your scheduling of burns around those types of events, or marathons or running events and things like that. So we can take those views into account for scheduling. but also when we're looking at those regional priorities, we take into account when people feel strongly about local risk reduction around our towns and what's important locally for communities. So our district staff engage with communities ongoing, basically. So. And Deb and I was thinking it would be really good to even in the future have a presentation or in this kind of forum about how we do that as agencies across Australia. That would be really interesting.
Yes, okay, I was just making a note about that. Thank you for that suggestion. Brian, there was a question for you about your resourcing system, and that is how many forward shifts does it actually cater for?
Yeah, that's a good question. The roster that I showed you was a 4-a-week roster, but I guess the answer to that specific question would be it can cater for as far as you plan ahead. So if you've got data in there, if you have people's availability and information in there, then it could cater for that whole time period. What we're just developing now is when you go to select someone for a prescribed burn, a deployment, a fire, whatever it might be, it shows you 7 days ahead plus the day prior. That way you can look at their fatigue patterns and make sure that you're not, let's say, assigning them to a burn yet they have only got 2 days left on there until they hit their fatigue. So yeah, hopefully that answers the question.
Great. Now, there was a couple of sort of deeper policy questions. One of them was about what the future might be for prescribed burning, given that the windows are shrinking, but as Brian, you mentioned in your presentation, they may actually be shifting. I don't know if either of you would like to make any comment on that.
Look, I'd love to make. Sorry,
yeah,
you go ahead, Brian.
You want to go first? After you.
Well, look, Deb, I see the future. I come from a fire ecology background, and we understand that the Australian landscape has evolved with fire. So the use of fire in land management is critical. It's critical for the health of ecosystems. It's critical for the protection of the things we value, and it's not just human things we value, but also other things we value, such as those wet forests and rainforests. So the use of fire as a land management tool to help maintain the health and resilience of those systems, and to also reduce bushfire risk, I think is part of our toolkit. I think, as Brian picked up before, there is a shift in our seasons, and we are burning more and more in places in Victoria at times we haven't burned before. So just this week there was some burning going on in different parts of the state for ecological outcomes. But I think the other important thing here is cultural landscapes and ensuring that we're working well with traditional owners and enabling the practice of using fire to manage cultural landscapes as well, and the aspirations of traditional owners. So I think it is definitely a tool that we have to maintain the use of, and I think it's really exciting, the future ahead, about how we can use it to have a more holistic approach to managing this beautiful country.
That's a great summation, Jill. And Brian, did you have a comment on that?
Yes, and just to start off with, I agree with everything Jill just said, and just to further expand on a couple points. Yeah, I also come from a forest management and fire ecology background, and I've seen both in the United States and here in Australia, the effectiveness of strategically placed landscape burns. I think what gets lost in the conversation sometimes is fire is not the only tool. It is one of the tools. And what I tried to demonstrate a little bit in the presentation, and you know, there's a lot of parameters around my statement here and what other people have said in the past is it's not a cure-all, but we did see an impact, that the burn had a positive impact with the recent bushfires. I think it's the other issue that I think we're debating a lot is, you know, whether burning should only occur, you know, close to close to assets or in the landscape. And I guess my professional opinion is we need to have both. And the work that we've done with the fuel moisture is allowing us to, again, look at those windows to make sure we're optimizing or picking the best windows that's best for the environment at that time. So yeah, I'd agree with all the other comments that Jill made as well. So we just have to keep, you know, the greater perspective in mind, and we can use some of this information to find better windows so we can make sure we're doing good for the environment and not just putting fire on the ground.
Thanks, Brian. I think you and Jill possibly summed up all the findings that are going to come out of the Royal Commission with a little bit of luck. So that ends the webinar for today. I'm afraid we've run out of time. If you do have any other further questions you want to put to Jill or Brian, you can direct them through me, Deb Sparks at the Centre of Excellence for Prescribed Burning. And I'd just like to thank Jill and Brian for their time today, and thank you all for attending.